My sister hijacked my graduation party mic, humiliated me with lies, then months later was dragged from court in handcuffs, screaming my name. My sister Claudia has been mean to me for as long as I can remember. When we were kids, she cut the head off my favorite stuffed bunny while staring me straight in the eye and remarked, "Well, now it's realistic. Bunnies die." If I ever got new clothes, she would borrow them without asking, return them dirty, or stretched out and laugh at my tears. My mother gave me a necklace for my 10th birthday that I had been wanting for months. The very next day, Claudia flushed it down the toilet during an argument and then gaslit me with, "You probably lost it. You're always careless." School was even worse. She would create stories about me, tell embarrassing lies to my crushes, and insult me in front of her friends. If I received decent grades, she'd accuse me of attempting to make her look stupid. If I struggled with something, Mom would tell everyone that I was slow. My parents consistently dismissed it as sibling rivalry, the standard. You two need to get along. One day you'll only have each other's speech. But I quickly discovered that my sister did not want to get along. She wanted me to feel embarrassed and humiliated. By the time high school came along, I had mastered the art of staying out of her way, but she kept digging at me. When I joined the debate team and began winning competitions, she insulted me as a desperate nerd attempting to appear important. When I was accepted to my ideal institution, she sneered, "Don't get too excited. You'll probably fail and come back." I was really looking forward to my high school graduation celebration. It wasn't only about the party, it was about finally appreciating something I'd worked for without Claudia in the spotlight. My parents agreed to let me host it in our backyard. I invited friends, instructors, and extended relatives. I spent weeks planning it with fairy lights, a taco bar, and a music that I spent hours creating. Of course, Claudia was upset about it. She began with passive-aggressive statements. Why did she have a lavish party? I didn't receive one. She did, although she did not enjoy parties back then. It's only high school, nobody cares. I'm going to be extremely bored that day, I told her. Straight up, if you can't be nice, just stay out of the way. She smirked and added, "Don't worry, I'll make it memorable." That should have been my warning. Everything began out well on the celebration day. Then Claudia made her move. First, she turned up the music to ear-splitting levels and began playing songs she knew I detested. When I ordered her to stop, she said loudly to my guests, "Oh, sorry, I didn't realize the party dictator was here." Then, when everyone was eating, she inadvertently spilled Coke all over the dessert table, ruining the cake, cupcakes and fruit display I had worked so hard on. She fake apologized in the most sarcastic tone possible. "Oops, my bad. Guess we'll have to diet it today." But the worst thing happened afterward. Claudia took the microphone for the speech I had not asked her to give while I was conversing with my old English teacher. She began recounting humiliating things about me, some exaggerated, others just made up. Examples include one time she peed her pants in middle school. She once cried for an hour because I ate her cookie. Don't worry, she's going to be a great college student if she can survive without Mom packing her lunch. Everyone laughed awkwardly, but I could feel my cheeks burning. I tried to take the microphone, but she yanked it away. That was when I snapped. I told her to go. She rolled her eyes and said, "Relax, it's just a joke. God, you're so sensitive." She walked away, but the harm had been done. The mood of the celebration was ruined. People kept attempting to console me, but all I could think was, she did it again. She couldn't let me have this. One day. After that, I stopped speaking with her. Totally. I didn't respond to her texts, calls, or snarky apology, which simply said, "Sorry if you took it the wrong way." For the following 6 months, she tried to behave as if nothing happened. At family dinners, she'd sit next to me and ask about school as if we were closest friends. If I ignored her, she'd say, "Wow, still holding a grudge. You need to get over it." Then over Thanksgiving, she made one last dig. "You're acting like I ruined your wedding." Or something. It was just a high school party. I gave her a straight face and responded, "It was my celebration. You ruined it on purpose. You've been tearing me down my whole life, and I'm done giving you access to me." And I intended it. I stopped inviting her to my events. I exited family group chats and informed my parents, if she's there, I'm not. Naturally, the guilt tripping began right away. My mother called last week and said Claudia was ready to talk. She put her on speaker mode without telling me, and Claudia's first words were, "So, are you done being dramatic?" I hung up right away and tossed my phone across the room where it bounced off my dorm wall. My hands shook as I took it back up and blocked Claudia's number for the 15th time this week. 20 minutes later, my roommate knocked on my door, holding her laptop and wearing a strange expression. She showed me her Instagram messages, and there were 3 new profiles, all made within the last hour, sending her walls of text about how I was mentally ill and needed assistance. The usernames were made up of random integers, but the writing style was entirely Claudia. My roommate watched as I took screenshots of everything and saved them in the evidence folder I'd created on my laptop. The next morning, in the cafeteria, she sat across from me and moved her plate away. She inquired if any of Claudia's claims were real, and I could tell she wasn't sure what to trust. I took out my phone and showed her the video Elisa had taken at my graduation party, which included Claudia's entire speech and my attempt to grab the microphone. Her expression changed from bewildered to scared as she watched. She stated my sister was very messed up and asked whether I had told anyone about it. That afternoon, I walked to the college counseling center and stood outside for 10 minutes before finally entering. The receptionist handed me an intake form and I sat there staring at the section on family connections. There was a checkbox for familial trauma, and I hovered my pen over it for a minute before marking it. 3 days later, I was sitting in Dr. Morrow's office telling her about the plush bunny and how Claudia had looked me in the eyes while ripping off its head. I told her about the jewelry in the toilet, the graduation party, and everything else. She listened without interrupting, then said something that made my entire body feel lighter. She stated that what I had experienced was not sibling rivalry, but rather systematic emotional abuse. That night, Albert discovered me crying in the common room after my father left me a voicemail about how I was pulling the family apart. He sat down next to me, and I eventually told him everything from the beginning. He held me as I described 20 years of being ripped down and humiliated. He said, "No wonder you flinch when people raise their voices." Later that week, I was alone in my room going through old family photos on my laptop. Claudia was either smirking at the camera or doing something to injure me that appeared to be playful, but was actually not. She was tugging my hair, grabbing my arm, or treading on my foot as everyone else smiled for the picture. How come no one noticed what was going on right in front of them? A week later, I was studying when someone began hammering on my door. I opened it to find my mother standing there with Claudia directly behind her. My mother said we'd speak it out like grown-ups, and began pushing past me toward my room. I blocked the doorway and told them to go, but Claudia screamed that it was overly emotional and selfish. My Ra heard the commotion and dashed down the hallway. She inquired whether everything was fine, and I informed her that these folks needed to leave. Claudia began yelling, claiming she was my sister and had every right to be there. Campus security arrived within minutes and led them both out, while Claudia yelled the entire time about how I was ruining everything. The next day, I met with University Legal Services, who assisted me in filing paperwork for a no trespass order. The council emphasized that if Claudia's behavior worsened further, I could be eligible for a restraining order. That evening, Elisa called from home, seeming fatigued. She said Claudia had been telling everyone I'd suffered a mental breakdown in college and was fabricating tales for publicity. Several people we knew from high school had contacted Elisa, asking what was going on. Elisa had been defending me, but she admitted it was getting more difficult because Claudia was so convincing. 2 weeks later, I returned to Dr. Morrow's office, and she handed me a stack of articles about narcissistic abuse. Everything made sense when I read about gaslighting, public humiliation, and how abusers always act the victim when confronted. I wasn't crazy, nor was I being overly sensitive. I was angry, and for the first time, it felt like the appropriate answer. 2 days later, I was sitting in economics class when my phone rang with a call from my father. I left it on voicemail and listened to it. After class, his voice exhausted as he told that Claudia had been crying for weeks and that her therapist had advised family reunification was critical to healing. I understood the manipulation right away, yet it still made my chest tight. Albert approached me at the library that afternoon and proposed we resolve my social media issues once and for all. We spent 4 hours in his dorm room building new accounts with fictitious names and maximum privacy settings, barring everyone who might be connected to Claudia, her pals, anyone from high school who could leak information. I wonder what Claudia's thinking when she performs these things. Ripping the bunny's head off while staring at her sister appears overly deliberate for a child. Each block seemed like another brick in the wall between me and my former existence. Midterms and papers kept me busy for weeks, and before I knew it, it was almost Thanksgiving. My parents had been calling regularly, promising Claudia that she would be at her boyfriend's family dinner in Chicago, and that I would safely return home. Despite my instincts screaming at me, I drove the 3 hours home, assuring myself it would be all right for just 2 days. I froze as I stepped in the front door with my overnight luggage, seeing Claudia sitting at the dining room table with her familiar sneer. My mother appeared from the kitchen stating we needed to hash this out as a family. I turned around without saying anything, got back in my car and went directly to Aunt Susan's house 20 minutes away. Susan opened the door in her jammies, obviously astonished to see me standing there with my suitcase, but she drew me in and made coffee while I sat at her kitchen table. Over store-bought pumpkin pie, I told her everything, beginning with the graduation celebration and progressing back through years of agony. Her expression darkened with each anecdote until she eventually set down her fork and stated that she had always wondered why I was so silent at family gatherings. The travel back to college was lengthier due to holiday traffic, and when I got to my dorm room at midnight, I saw that my door was slightly open despite the fact that I had secured it. Nothing was stolen, yet everything was incorrect. My diary was on a different shelf. My laptop was open when I had left it closed, and my dresser drawers were not fully closed. My skin crawled as I examined each nook, looking for minor clues that someone had touched everything. Campus security took a report, but without proof of forced entry or larceny, they could only offer increased patrols. 3 days later, I returned to Dr. Morrow's office to describe the incident, and she assisted me in recognizing the pattern of escalation in Claudia's behavior, explaining that losing control over me was making her frantic. We spent the hour developing a comprehensive safety plan that included emergency contact information, documentation, tactics, and particular routines for various eventualities. I was heading back from that appointment when my phone alerted me to an email from an unfamiliar address. The mail included old Instagram photographs that I removed months ago, modified to appear compromising, with my face superimposed onto other bodies in provocative postures. Although the content was brief, Claudia's writing style was instantly apparent in her threat to send them to my teachers. I went straight to campus police, who took the blackmail threat seriously and called up a detective who specialized in cybercrime. She stated that blackmail was a felony and that they could track IP addresses, officially launching an inquiry that afternoon with case numbers and evidence logs. A week later, I was studying in the library when my mother called, distraught and yelling that Claudia had told her I was attempting to have her arrested for nothing. She requested that I drop the charges immediately, claiming that I was wrecking my sister's future due to minor sibling squabbles, but I hung off while she was still speaking. Albert had been watching everything unfold and discussed my issue with his folks during their weekly video conversation. His mother, who worked as a social worker, encouraged me to spend winter break with them at their home near Cleveland. When I visited at their house 2 weeks later, his mother sat with me in the living room and softly validated what I'd gone through, marking the first time an adult had taken my side without making excuses for Claudia or attempting to reconcile. When I returned to university after winter break, the nightmares began immediately away. I'd have dreams of Claudia standing at my dorm room doorway, sitting in the back of my courses, or waiting outside my job at the campus bookstore. The dreams were so genuine that I'd wake up at 3 a.m. I had to check my door lock 3 or 4 times before I could even consider going back to sleep. My roommate began to question my well-being, since I would get up several times each night to ensure the door was closed and the windows were fastened. The lack of sleep made things difficult, but I couldn't stop myself from double-checking everything. 2 weeks into the semester, Elisa texted me a slew of screenshots that made my stomach drop. Claudia had been emailing all of our high school pals on Facebook with a completely made-up story about how I had stolen money from our parents and developed drug problems in college. She claimed that I had been begging family members for money to maintain my habits, which was why I had cut her off. Most people who knew me didn't believe it, Elisa remarked. However, I noticed from the screenshots that some individuals were starting to ask questions and wonder if there was any truth to it. I was sitting in the library trying to focus on my chemistry homework when my phone called with an unfamiliar number. It was the detective who had been managing my case, and he had some news that made me drop my head on the desk. They traced the blackmail emails I'd been receiving to a coffee shop 3 blocks from Claudia's apartment. The security camera showed her sitting there with her laptop at the exact times the emails were sent, and the investigator stated that they now had sufficient evidence to proceed with charges. The next day, I met with a prosecutor at the courthouse downtown, and she explained what would happen next. She stated that Claudia would be arrested, followed by an arraignment in which she would enter a plea, and they would most likely offer her a deal because this was her first violation. Then, she looked at me and uttered what I had been dreading. 3 days later, I was in my economics class when my phone started vibrating non-stop. I came out into the hallway and noticed 5 missed calls from my mother. When I called back, she was shouting so loudly that I had to hold the phone away from my ear. She continued telling me I was evil, that I was destroying our family, and that I couldn't be her daughter if I could do this. My father then took the phone and spoke in a cold and flat tone. A week later, I sat in the rear row of the courtroom, Albert to one side and Dr. Morrow to the other. My palms shook as I watched them carry Claudia in for arraignment. She pled not guilty as the prosecutor had warned me would happen, and the judge freed her on bail with a no-contact order, which meant she couldn't approach me or speak with me in any way. As she went out of the courtroom with her lawyer, she turned and stared directly at me, mouthing something I could hear clearly from across the room. Aunt Susan contacted me that afternoon as I was walking back to my dorm. She'd been conducting her own research, speaking with cousins and other family members I hadn't seen in years. Claudia found to have been unkind to several of them, particularly the younger relatives. However, everyone was too terrified or embarrassed to say anything. Susan was compiling a pattern of behavior dating back to when we were young children, documenting everything individuals remembered. The stress of everything made it tough to concentrate on schoolwork. Despite knowing about the no-contact order, I would sit in class continually looking over my shoulder to see whether Claudia was present. My chemistry grade went from an A to a C in 3 weeks, and I couldn't focus long enough to read more than a page of any textbook. Dr. Morrow formally diagnosed me with PTSD at one of our sessions and suggested we meet twice a week to help me cope with everything. 2 weeks after the arraignment, I was doing laundry in my dorm basement when I checked my phone and noticed 3 new voicemails from my mother's number. My heart began beating because I sensed something was wrong. Mom never left voicemail messages. When I played the first one, I didn't hear Mom's voice. The prosecutor added witness intimidation charges the next morning. When I handed her the voicemails, she played them for the court at an emergency hearing that afternoon, and he promptly revoked Claudia's bail. I stood on the courthouse steps, watching through the glass doors as 2 officers carried my sister away in handcuffs, her hands tied behind her back. I waited for remorse, sadness, or something to hit me, but all I felt was relief, like if I could finally breathe again after weeks. The next morning, a courier knocked on my dorm room door and delivered a hefty envelope from Brennan Hayes & Associates, Columbus's most expensive law firm. My hand shook as I opened it and read the formal letter advising me to reconsider my position and warning me against irreversibly breaking family relationships, as well as implying that I could face legal action for defamation. Albert found me sitting on my bed 20 minutes later, still holding the letter, and promptly phoned the prosecutor's office while I sat there, motionless. The prosecution urged us not to worry because this was standard intimidation techniques, but I couldn't stop thinking about how my parents were spending thousands of dollars to protect the person who had been hurting me my whole life. A week later, Dr. Morrow set aside her entire afternoon to assist me in writing my victim impact statement, and each sentence felt like tearing glass out of my flesh. I wrote about the stuffed bunny, the Flushing necklace, the botched graduation party, and all the minor cuts in between that built up to 20 years of misery. She helped me find the words when I couldn't, sitting quietly as I cried through chapters describing how Claudia not only stole my childhood, but also attempted to destroy my future. That same week, Albert's mother called and officially welcomed me to stay with them for the summer, claiming their guest room was already set up and ready for me. Claudia went from cruel sister to criminal mastermind, faster than someone failing chemistry class, which now appears to include our narrator, thanks to all of this drama. Breaking into dorms, making phony pictures, and committing coffee shop crimes. She sat with me in their kitchen and told me about her sister's decision to cut off toxic family members years ago, and how chosen family may be stronger than blood. And I accepted their offer, feeling as if I had finally found firm ground after months of tremors. Elisa had to testify in a deposition the next Tuesday, so she brought the video from my graduation party on her phone and showed it frame by frame to the prosecutor and Claudia's lawyer. The prosecutor contacted me later to say that was strong proof of a pattern of public humiliation and targeted harassment, particularly the point where Claudia seized the microphone as I tried to stop her. 2 weeks later, I was helping Albert's mother prepare dinner when we heard a hammering on the front door and my mother yelling that she knew I was inside. Albert's mother instructed me to remain in the kitchen while she answered the door, but I could hear everything as Marlene pushed past her and demanded to, "Oh, see me." When I walked into the living room, Marlene's face turned scarlet, yelling about Claudia going to prison, and asking if that was what I wanted, my own sister in prison. When I didn't respond or move closer to her, she crossed the room in 3 steps and slapped me hard across the face, the sound reverberating throughout the home. Albert's mother quickly got out her phone and dialed 911, while Marlene continued to yell at me about family, loyalty, and how I was destroying everything. Within 10 minutes, the police arrived and arrested Marlene for assault while I stood there, with Albert's mother's arm around me, my cheeks still burning. I had to submit. Another police report at the station, and the detective informed me that family violence frequently worsens during legal proceedings, which did not make me feel any better about having to witness my own mother being handcuffed. The next day, I returned to my old home while my parents were at work to pack the few items I wanted to save. I sat in my former bedroom for the final time, gazing at every object and recalling how Claudia had smashed my jewelry box, torn my posters, stolen my diary, and read it aloud to her friends. I left the majority of it behind, taking only a few photos and my old debate medals before locking the door on that room and my life forever. A month later, the prosecutor called to inform me that Claudia had been offered a plea deal consisting of 2 years probation, required therapy, and a permanent restraining order, which I considered reasonable. But Claudia refused, insisting on going to trial because she wanted a chance to give her side of the tale. The prosecution said that narcissists frequently do this because they want to perform, they seek attention and the opportunity to play the victim in front of an audience. 3 days after our talk, a parcel addressed to me arrived at Albert's residence with no return address. Inside was my old plush bunny from when I was 5. Claudia had pulled the head off and it was now badly put back together, with black thread. The note simply stated, "Fixed it for you," and was signed, Mom. However, it felt more like a threat than an apology or peace offering. Meanwhile, Aunt Susan had been discreetly documenting whatever she could find, rummaging through old boxes in my parents' attic and compiling a timeline spanning 20 years. She discovered elementary school report cards with teacher remarks regarding my withdrawn and anxious behavior with my sister. I found my old journals, which I assumed were lost. I found images of me flinching away from Claudia as a toddler. The pattern had always existed, scrolled in a dozen different handwritings by instructors, counselors, and coaches who had all sensed something was amiss, but had never quite joined the dots. 2 months later, I decided to start something on campus that I never thought I'd have the courage to do. I reserved a tiny room at the student center and distributed brochures promoting a support group for persons who had experienced family abuse. The first meeting, I sat with my notebook and 3 seats arranged in a circle, watching the door and wondering if anyone would show up. A female named Ashley strolled in first, followed by a guy named Ben and another girl simply known as Kay. We sat for an hour mostly looking at each other. However, at the end, Ashley was crying about her stepfather and Ben was talking about his elder brother, who used to lock him in closets. By the 4th meeting, we had 12 participants and needed to move to a larger room. The prosecutor called me the following week to inform me that the trial date had been set for 6 months. I attempted to concentrate on my lectures, but when the notice that I'd have to testify arrived 2 days later, I threw up straight in my dorm room. Albert held my hair back as I heaved into the garbage can, and Dr. Morrow spent the entire following session reminding me that I was stronger than I realized, and that I had already survived the worst part. Mrs. Chelsea from back home spotted me in the cereal section at a supermarket shop near college. She drew me into a strong hug before I could move away, telling me how much my mother missed me and how she looked dreadful without me. The guilt hit me like a blow in the stomach, and I abandoned my entire cart right in the aisle. I drove back to my flat, crying so hard that I couldn't see the road. 2 weeks later, things worsened. Claudia's lawyer filed a motion claiming that because I was mentally unwell, my testimony should be invalidated. They wanted all of my therapy records, every single session with Dr. Morrow, and anything private I'd ever said. Dr. Morrow sat me down and described what was going to happen, how they would try to use my PTSD diagnosis against me, and how they would twist things to make me appear insane. The judge limited what they could view, but Claudia's lawyer was still allowed to confront Dr. Morrow about my diagnosis in court. My former English instructor reached out on Facebook after learning about the case from another teacher. She recalls seeing me crying in the restroom after Claudia humiliated me in front of the entire cafeteria junior year. I remembered how I had begged her not to tell anyone since it would just make things worse. She offered to testify about what she had witnessed over the years. I began writing everything down in a private blog just to get it all out of my head. The words came out like poison being drawn from a wound, page after page of memories I had attempted to forget. Albert read portions of it with my consent, and then held me for an hour while I sobbed into his chest. A month later, my father sent me a letter through my lawyer. He was filing for divorce from my mother after she was arrested for assisting Claudia. He wrote that he had failed to protect me, but he still did not want Claudia to go to jail, that she was still his daughter, and that maybe we could all go to treatment together one day. I read it 3 times before throwing it away without responding. At our next meeting, the prosecutor showed me something that made my skin crawl. Security footage from a coffee shop near my hostel, the library, and the parking garage all show Claudia following me for weeks before the blackmail began. She'd been studying my calendar, calculating out when I'd be alone and organizing everything like it was a sick game. The prosecution stated that the premeditation would make the allegations significantly more serious. I was sitting in my psychology course the next week when someone behind me laughed in a high, nasty tone that sounded exactly like Claudia. My chest tightened and I couldn't breathe or think. So, I gathered my belongings and fled out of the room. I spent an hour in the bathroom attempting to calm my breathing, spraying cold water on my face and practicing the counting techniques Dr. Morrow taught me. 2 weeks later, I was sitting in Dr. Morrow's office, staring at this light bar she was holding, while she discussed how EMDR could help with trauma memories. She shifted the light back and forth, as I imagined Claudia pulling my bunny's head off, and my gaze followed suit, and I started sobbing harder than I had in years. But the memory felt different, afterward, like if I was viewing it through thick glass rather than experiencing it again. Aunt Susan called Albert the next day, crying because she'd been discussing the trial with her daughter Sophia. And Sophia broke down and told her that Claudia had cut up her wedding dress with scissors the night before her wedding 6 years ago, convincing everyone Sophia did it herself during a panic attack about getting married. Sophia had been in treatment ever since, believing she had experienced a breakdown. But now she knew Claudia had done it and she wanted to testify. And Aunt Susan kept saying how sorry she was for not believing me. My scores began to improve after I discovered out how to compartmentalize legal information in my mind during class, and my economics professor approached me after I aced the exam and offered me a research assistant position for the following semester, which felt like the first typical positive thing to happen in months. A month later, the pre-trial hearing began. Even though I didn't have to go, I read all of the transcripts online, and Claudia's lawyer was attempting to get the whole thing thrown out, claiming it was a family issue rather than a criminal matter. However, the judge stated that the evidence of premeditation and the gravity of the conduct plainly placed it in criminal territory. I was headed to my statistics class on Tuesday morning when campus security hurried past me into the humanities building. I followed and noticed Marlene standing there with a huge poster board banner that stated, "Forgive your family." While students took pictures with their phones, security seized her arms and she began screaming that I was hurting our family and that God would punish me for turning my back on blood. They carried her to their car as she continued to yell. And I subsequently found out she was detained again for breaking the restraining order. That delivery with the old rabbit appears to have arrived at the perfect time just after Claudia rejected the plea agreement. Makes me question if Marlene is indeed behind it or if someone else intended to convey a warning about what's to come. 2 weeks later, the prosecutor summoned me to prep sessions where she forced me to practice answering questions while pretending to be Claudia's lawyer in an attempt to make me appear insane or malicious, and she kept interrupting me when I became too upset, urging me to take a deep breath and respond with facts. At one of these meetings at the courthouse, I came across a woman named Ashley crying in the washroom, and when I inquired Whether she was okay, she claimed her sister had tormented her for 20 years and she was finally filing charges, and we exchanged contacts and began chatting every day because she understood what it was like when everyone told you to just forgive your family. Albert found a USB disk in a box of my old belongings from home, and when we plugged it in, it brought up all of